Welcome, everybody. I'm Elinor Silverstein, and I'm here with Linda Tellington-Jones hosting her book club. And today we have Rupert Isaacson, and we are welcoming you, Rupert, to discuss your book, The Long Journey Home. And I know that Linda has so much that she wants to say in inviting you to this book club.
Well,
thanks for having me.
It's such a pleasure and such an honor, actually, Rupert, to have you here. And I just want to let our listeners know, I first met you, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago in Austin, when you were just first getting started. And what you have accomplished in that 5 years, which you do tell in your book, this a wonderful book that next book you've written about Roland. It's groundbreaking. It is so brilliant, and it gives, I believe, such hope to everyone with family on the autism spectrum. And the fact that you now, in that 5 years, have developed these 3 programs, which I know you're going to be talking about. The Horseboy Method Therapeutic Riding Approach, and 2 other programs I'm just reading actually from my iPad. 2 programs that do not include horses, but involve the kinetic relating to motion learning techniques learned from working with horses. And that's Horseboy Learning, the homeschooling module, and Horseboy Movement Method, a brain training technique that works in homes, gardens, classrooms, parks, anywhere you just need your child to lead you, following their passionate interests outside in nature, in movement. I mean, since I first met you, I've been reading everything that I possibly could, and all of the various books and methods for dealing with the autism spectrum. And I am very privileged to know you and to know the amazing group that you have gathered around you in Elgin, Texas. And so, Elinor, I'm going to turn it over to you because you have such a beautiful way of guiding our guests. And I use my iPad. I have the book, but I love working on the iPad because I can underline and go back and look at everything that you said. And actually, what I want to add is your ability as a writer, your wordsmithing, your passion that you bring through in your words it's a highlight of all of the books that I read, and I read all the time. So.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you.
You know, and for someone like me who only reads science books, I feel like I was in poetry in motion, reading the story and never wanted to put the book down. And it's better than, I guess, I don't know, is this how novels are written? Because I am entranced in the reading of this, and your story, your bonding and your connection. And you know, Rupert, it's not easy being the parent of a child that has special needs. And with autism, with the not knowing of moment to moment, like you talk about, even before we even get more into the book, how as a parent were you able to gather yourself to start to understand him, but even to give him that love?
Well, you know, I think every parent knows, and probably most people on this call are parents. There is an elemental love that just simply kicks in, as you know, Elinor, and that takes care of itself, that we all have that primal memory embedded in our DNA that applies boot to us continually to make sure that we stay on the path of what we should do. But I think if I have a talent, it's ironically, as a listener. And that's what makes a good writer or a journalist, is that you notice what's happening, you observe what's happening. So I was, of course, deeply interested in and deeply listening to what my son was saying verbally and non-verbally, and realizing that my best chance of success was simply to follow him and allow him to mentor me. And that's the challenge, because none of us grew up in any kind of society where children are allowed to mentor adults. We certainly were not when we were kids. And our experience of adults when we were kids was mostly adults projecting their egos through authority. And we mistrusted those adults, but we accepted that that was the norm. And so then when we become parents, it's very difficult for us to break that mold, break that habit. But I guess fortunately I was left in a position of zero choice, because I kind of gave it a bit of a go. The do it because I say so form of parenting lasted about 10 minutes, and I landed flat on my ass with that one, and watched my mother land flat on her ass with it when she tried it. Watched everyone I knew land flat on their ass with it. And okay, if this horse is bucking you off, you better find out what's up with the horse's back, right? You better start listening to the horse. Otherwise you're going to break bones. So you have a fairly good vested interest in getting to the bottom of the problem. And but I think it just does come down to love, that you fortunately don't have to come through this with any kind of intellectual process. It just happens in the DNA of parenting, luckily.
So, I mean, not all parents know how to do that, and they don't have the tools. And part of it is you, and part of it is you being an expert horseman in understanding you're not going to try to break the horse, and how do you read the horse? Right? Yeah, which of course you arrive at by lots of mistakes. But hopefully you're learning from your mistakes as you go, yes.
And it's interesting, in the beginning of this book, you talk about how you tried the tried and true way, which is, the government way that children in this spectrum are meant to be taught. And it was costing you, $100,000 or more, and getting nowhere.
Totally. Here's the deal with that. I guess because I'm a good listener, and I'm a journalist, I will always look for as many other sides of the story as I can. So I was getting all this input from the quote unquote experts, and they were all using this very negative language. They were talking about deficits, disorders, dysfunctions, etc. And I was like, well, I get that, because that's fairly obvious. He can't talk, he's shitting his pants, okay, he's having these tantrums, okay. But where's the other 50% of the story? There must be successful adult autists out there who've gone through this. Or is there some like death camp they all go to when they're 21 and they make them into sausages? And, is my sofa actually made of autistic people? I don't think so, So where do I find these people? And so for me, the logical thing was to contact the highest profile one I could find, which was Temple Grandin, Dr. Temple Grandin. So I just wrote her an email and said, can I come and interview you? And for those of you who don't know who she is, I'm sure all of you do, but for those who don't, she's a professor of animal sciences at Colorado State University and a best-selling author, and she revolutionized the livestock slaughter industry in the USA to make it less stressful for the animals going through that. But she also happens to be autistic, and she was profoundly autistic when she was a very little girl. She was, mute, rocking in a corner, wiping her poo on the walls. So I went to see her, and I said, how does my son become you? And she said, it's relatively simple, Rupert. You have to follow his passionate interests. And his obsessions, especially the ones that you don't like and think are inappropriate, because that's where he's at. And you have to do it as much as you can outside in nature, because there's, in man-made situations, a lot of bad sensory triggers that can stop them from learning, stress them too much. And you have to do as much of it as you can in movement, because most of these people, myself included, are kinetic learners. And I said, thank you very much. So I went back home and I saw that the behavioral therapists who were working very expensively with my kid were not doing these things. In fact, they were doing the polar opposite, despite the fact that my son was expressing loud and clear his distress. And so I said, hey, I just went to talk to the world's most famous autistic person, and she's saying to do the absolute opposite of what you're doing. What about that? And I immediately got this very aggressive pushback. And again, as a journalist, it makes you ask a question. Well, people only get aggressive like that if they're afraid of something. So the question is, what are you afraid of? The only thing that you could logically be afraid of is that your stuff doesn't work, that your shtick doesn't work. Okay, duly noted, you're fired. Because I could, if what Temple tells me doesn't work, I can find another behavioral therapist on any street corner. So off you go, and I will follow my son outside as directed. And I did, and it was that following of him physically and emotionally and intellectually that led to everything.
So and led to Betsy.
It led to Betsy. But I want to stress that from the outset, I was mentored. I was just having this conversation with my friend here today. I was mentored by autistic people. I've been mentored by autistic people from the get-go. It's not a question of me, a clever neurotypical person, thinking, oh, look, I can come up with these clever ideas for what to do with autistic people, and oh, look how clever I am, they work. No, it's the opposite. It's like, I'm clever enough to know that I don't know dick about being on the autism spectrum because I'm not autistic. So therefore, it's very logical to me to look for mentorship from the people that understand it, who happen to be an articulate population.
So can we tell for a moment the story of Betsy?
Yes. Do you want me to do that?
For sure.
Okay. So my following him outside led us into the forest because we live in the forest. And immediately we were connecting over plants, what you could put in your mouth, what you couldn't put in your mouth, what you could eat, what you couldn't eat, what was bad, what was not bad. And I couldn't explain toxicity and nutrition at that point. I could say, this is a daddy leaf, this is not a daddy leaf. We're only going to eat and pick daddy leaves. And we found a whole range of daddy leaves, and then gradually I could differentiate the daddy leaves and so forth. And then one day, given I am an obsessive horseman, but I had given up riding because I thought that my son wasn't safe around horses. I had no background in therapeutic riding, and it was not doing me any good. I was getting very depressed. And but one day, instead of going right along the forest trail as normal, he darted left through the undergrowth, and before I could grab him, he was through the fence into my neighbour's horse pasture, where, as Murphy's Law would have it, all 5 horses were grazing right by the fence, and he went in under the hooves and lay on his back. And I thought, he's going to get trampled, he's going to get killed. So I was creeping up to try and grab him to pull him back through the fence, but instead of him being trampled, something rather extraordinary happened. Betsy, who was the boss mare, the alpha mare of that herd, who was an absolute cow, by the way, and a total bitch, very, very gently, acting out of character, moved the other horses off with her nose. Normally, if she wanted to move the other horses off, she'd do it pretty rudely. Not today. If she had done that, there's no question my son would have been trampled. And then she bent her head to him and began to lick and chew and half closed the eye. And those of you who are horse people know that that's somewhere between acceptance, submission, and so forth, and not a million miles away from a dog showing its belly, and that there are numerous techniques that horse trainers use to get a horse to accept you like this. But I hadn't seen a horse spontaneously offer this to a Homo sapiens sapiens monkey before, much less a babbling 2.5-year-old one lying on his back. And so I thought, wow, this is really extraordinary self-directed modification of Betsy's behavior, and it's happening right in front of my eyes. And I know that if it was me lying on my back there, this would not happen. This is something extraordinary that I'm witnessing. I can't say why it's happening, but I can observe that it's happening. And then he wanted to go back to her day after day, and he wasn't verbal at that point, but he could show me with his body what he wanted to do. So he would just leave the house, I would follow, he would go trot over to Betsy's pasture, and he would climb through the fence, and he would stand next to her with his arms up like this, jumping. So it's okay, you want to get on her back. So luckily I knew she was a quiet mare, so I would lift him up and I'd put him on her back, and I'd keep my hand on him so that if she moved, he wouldn't fall off. And all of his stimming, all of his self-stimulatory stereotypical behaviors that we associate with autism, the rocking, the flapping, the chanting, all that stuff, would just stop. And I had this really different kid. I didn't know why. I just knew it was happening. It didn't occur to me at that point to ride with him, because I grew up in the UK and we use English saddles, and there's not room for two. So kids don't grow up in front of mum and dad riding. They tend to grow up in a more formalized way with riding lessons. But of course, I live in Texas, and Betsy's owner, Stafford, was a Western rider, and he had this big old massive oversized 20-inch Western saddle. So I looked at it and went, oh great, room for two, I should give it a go. So I did, and I always used to talk to my son as if he was verbal. I would be like a sort of non-stop NPR in the background, saying, oh, look, there's the sky, SKY, it's BLUE, it's blue. What is the sky? Well, what is oxygen? What is the atmosphere? What is the pulmonary system? And I would go blather on like this, because I assumed, it turned out rightly in the end, that he had more receptive language than he had expressive language. He could understand more than he could speak. And later on, it turned out that that was the case when he became verbal and began to repeat things that I had said 2 years ago, often quite embarrassingly in public, etc. So watch out when you deal with non-verbal autistic kids, because they're listening very hard. So every shit that you say is recorded and logged. So I'm up there with him, and I'm just sort of looking a bit for rhetorical inspiration. So I look at the woods, and there's the pond. I'm like, okay, should we go to the woods or the pond? And he had something called echolalia at that point. Echolalia is where they will repeat stuff that they've heard, but they don't necessarily understand what it is they're saying. And a classic way to do echolalia is to repeat back the last 3 words that they've heard somebody say. So he went to the pond, and I thought, well, that's just echolalia. It doesn't really mean anything, but it's better than a kick in the face. Fine. So we ride down to the pond, and we rode down to the pond, and this big blue heron got up and flapped away, and he said heron. I didn't know he knew that word.
Wow.
And that's where it all began. Yeah.
Wow.
And very, very quickly, I started giving him choices, and he started responding. And very quickly, I noticed that I got more communication at the trot than at the walk, and more at the canter than at the trot. I didn't at that point know why. I subsequently found out why, but I just knew that this was happening. So I realized that I had this mechanism, and it was the same week, ironically, that his speech therapist had given up on him. So I was like, no problem, I think I found my therapist. She's got 4 legs and a tail, and she has this amazing talent to poo while she walks without getting it on her legs, which I've been trying to do for years and have never mastered. So, I think we're going to go with this. And we began to spend hours, literally hours a day, riding together. And his language came, but not just language, literacy. I would paint letters on trees. He was into the Lion King, so I'm singing Lion King songs, and I would paint an S, an I, an M. We go around the corner, there'd be a B and an A and a little Simba toy waiting for him. He learned to read, and then we were taking the Dr. Seuss books up there, and I would organize my friends and family into little groups, and we'd take one away in an evil Godzilla voice and then put them back in an evil granny voice with farts on his head and make it funny. And he totally began to get numerate, and I had this extraordinary thing, which by the grace of God I'd stumbled into, but I might not have if Temple hadn't told me from the get-go to go do what I did.
What is the piece, because I think most people don't understand, what is the piece about being on a horse, the horse is walking, versus the trot, versus the canter?
Okay. So what happened was, it wasn't just the gait, it was the quality of the gait. Everyone here knows what gait means, right? The walk, trot, canter is the gait. There's the different gaits of the horse, G-A-I-T. I always forget that people don't necessarily know the horse jargon. It's not necessarily the gait, it's the balance and rhythm that the horse is in during that gait. So let's imagine it was you with a child on your shoulders. Let's say you ran instead of walked with the kid on your shoulders. To get the same effect, you would do a very rhythmic dance-like jog trot. Then you would get the same effect that we got. What happened was I started doing it with other kids and noticing that we had this universal effect. And my ex, who I'm still very close to, actually still live on the same property, is a professor of developmental psychology at University of Texas. So I had access to neurologists, and I had access to people that I could ask what's going on. And I would invite them out, and I'd show them video and so on. And they all came to the same conclusion. They said that when the horse is in these dancey type of rhythms, i.e. what we call dressage type rhythms, when the center of gravity of the horse is on the haunches, so it's what you call collection, when the horse is in collection like this. the pelvis of the horse is going like that, which makes the rider's pelvis go like this. And although that happens anyway, even at a very loose, ordinary walk, if you do it in this super collected way, you get a much greater hip rocking effect on the part of the person on the horse, including the child. And that pelvic rocking in rhythm, sustained over time, causes your body to produce the hormone. And that hormone is oxytocin. And oxytocin is the hormone of happiness, but it's also, crucially for us, the hormone of communication. So when you're dealing with autism, auto is the Greek word for the self. Autism, selfism, locked within the self. The difficulty is the relationship with the exterior world and with other people. And you suddenly fill this child with a hormone that almost compels them to communicate. They begin to communicate. And then once we understood this, I thought, well, okay, fine, we can do this with horses, but this takes an inordinate amount of equestrian skill to get your horse, trained into this way, in a reliable way. However, we could reproduce this effect without a horse easily now that we know. So now we can use play equipment. Now we can use our shoulders. Now I can use a wheelbarrow. Now I can use a trampoline. Now I can do it in the pool. And even with Rowan, you have to remember that 90% of the time he wasn't on the horse. And we were homeschooling by now because the special ed classroom at the local rural Texas school, God and guns and Jesus, guns and Jesus and Jesus and guns, wasn't up to snuff really when it came to special ed, let alone or general ed. So I had pulled him out by now. So we were educating on the horse and educating on play equipment and on my shoulders and any other way that I could find kinetically to produce this oxytocin effect. But there's actually more that goes on with this than just the oxytocin. So I know you know this backwards, Elinor, but for those of you who aren't familiar with the neuroscience or the brain science, these same rocking motions where you have to find your balance from moment to moment cause your cerebellum to produce a series of cells called, with a funny name, that sound like Pokemon characters, called Purkinje cells. But they're not Pokemon characters. What Purkinje cells actually are is they're the networks within the brain that cause the different parts of the brain to communicate with each other properly. People on the autism spectrum suffer from two interesting differences in their brains. The fMRI scans that have been done on adult autistic brains have often come up with these two same differences. An overdeveloped amygdala, which is the part of your brain that governs fight, flight, and freeze, and produces the stress hormone cortisol, which blocks you from learning because it narrows your focus, kills neurons, prevents you from accessing your intellect so that you don't get distracted by a threat. Well, the oxytocin, guess what, is the antidote to that. So that's great. But the second difference is that a lot of autistic people have a deficit of Purkinje cells. Their cerebellums do not produce the same amount of Purkinje cells as you or I, so therefore the brain doesn't develop globally at the same rate, which gives us a clue into why a child might say, know all the football scores for 10 years, but can't wipe his ass, or has great math skills but terrible social skills, etc. So suddenly these movements are causing your brain to produce the Purkinje cells. And what happens is the brain development begins to normalize a little bit. And that fires up the prefrontal cortex, the area of your brain in the front here, which is the CEO, which governs logic, reason, emotional regulation, which are jolly useful things if you're going to navigate existence.
Yes, but hold on.
Yeah.
I'm not hearing a step, right? So, because you're getting me really excited about this, and I got to throw this in. So,
well, there's more. There's more.
There's vagal tone.
There is vagal tone. Let's get to that in a second. Okay, let's just stay within it. Totally. Okay. Let me do my little spiel, and then I want you to explain to us about that. Okay. So you've got your prefrontal cortex fired up. Okay. Now there's some other very cool things that happen. Your brain produces a protein called BDNF when you move and problem solve and find your balance like this. BDNF stands for brain-derived, i.e. produced by the brain, neurotrophic, meaning growing of brain cells, factor effect. So basically it's like miracle growth for the brain. So when you move in this way, you are more intelligent, your IQ goes up. temporarily. So if you spend your life in this, that's because we're hunter-gatherer apes. We are designed to move and problem solve. So we are at our most problem solvee, we're at our most effective when we're in movement, because that's when we're hunting, that's when we're gathering. Okay, so this is hardwired into us, which is why kinetic learning is always going to be the most effective form of learning. And then finally, the vestibular system in the inner ear also gets activated, which isn't just to do with balance, it's also to do with attention, paying attention to things. So what happens is I stumbled into this way of not just putting the kid in an optimum position to receive information, but to retain it, to keep it. And this was very cool. And now let's talk about vagal toning, please. Because this is very important.
Well, you know, and you also use the word attention, and I think of the word awareness, right? Because
go on.
Well, you just said it, and I'm thinking, I wonder, to me, that attention in Feldenkrais kind of thinking, right, Linda? Can you hear me?
A little louder.
Oh, okay. To us, in Feldenkrais, attention is really going to use more of the amygdala. It can set off extensors. It means heightened awareness or heightened alertness. What we're looking for is self-awareness. And so in the rocking of the pelvis, yes, there is this production of this amazing hormone and neurotransmitter of oxytocin, but we're also going to increase the ability for the cerebral spinal fluid to flow. And so this amazing fluid, if you've ever had the opportunity to get to see the inside of a brain with the skull open and see the functioning, it really flows. In about every 15-20 seconds, this fluid flows from around the brain, goes down the spinal cord and sieves out into the body. And then it collects it back from the body and transmits it up the spinal cord and bathes the brain and squishes it a little bit. It's the best way to massage a brain. And it's a fluid system, and rocking the pelvis is the thing that really helps that, which is the riding of a horse. The kinetic movements that you talk about, the creeping, the crawling, the walking, the jumping, the leaping, but it's that movement that gets this in the pelvis, which is like when we feel famished inside, what do we say? I need to go for a walk before I say anything. And it's that walking that's creating that, right? Then that's in part with the oxytocin, and that's in part then we produce the vagal tone, because you mentioned that I didn't write it down. What did you say is happening in the brain stem?
Me? You talking to me?
Yes.
You're talking about the cerebellum?
Yes.
The cerebellum is producing Purkinje cells at this point. Lots and lots of Purkinje cells.
Guess what comes out of that brain stem?
Yeah.
The vagal nerve.
Right, very true.
The trigeminal nerve. And the trigeminal nerve, as Linda and I have talked about, it goes to the face. That's a part that will be involved in a sidetrack to help with eye contact. Mm-hmm. And it stimulates all of that. And so then you're talking about getting this movement with them. You're going to work all these systems, and it's miraculous, because it's almost like, I hear you and I get excited about the Purkinje cells, and I get excited about breaking it down, and then I go back and I Linda-ize it and the whole, putting it all together, and then I go back and I think of all the science pieces and the neuroscience, and then I come back and see the whole, right? And so, and then that makes me think in the next book, which is this one, you had this knowing that you needed to go even further. So I know I'm moving away from vagal tone, except I'm not, because I got it in every part of the next story. In when you went to Africa.
Yes.
So what, I want to put something in here for the people who may not know yet the horse boy way of the riding, or the fact is that the way, Rupert, you have chosen, or found, not chosen, that has found you, is by riding in the saddle and actually having that pelvic contact that I've seen you and your other therapists do with people really encourages that in another way. It's just wonderful what I've seen you doing, and I think that's important. And the other thing that I wanted you to say, one of the important points for me is the fact in the work that I've been blessed to develop, is I've learned to listen to my intuition. And I love how you say in your first book, The Horse Boy, and the second book, how you followed that gut feeling, although it made no sense whatsoever to take this 7-year-old child, first of all, to Mongolia, for God's sake, and then on this difficult journey, that the other 3 journeys that you did following your gut feeling.
Yeah. Well, luckily for me, I think with intuition, and this comes back to vagal nerve again, Elinor, is intuition, in fact, the vagal nerve at work, and the more you exercise that muscle, that faculty, the stronger it gets. I think the answer is probably yes. But of course, different cultures place more or less importance on this. I'm fortunate in that I am British South African, and the South Africans, we are frequently in situations where logic will not get us through. I'll give you an example. A typical thing that could happen to you in South Africa is you're driving down the road and your car breaks down, and it breaks down by a township, and you have a good-looking girl with you in the car, and the local lads are coming over to check you out, and they are looking a little bit predatory. You speak 3 African languages. However, there's 8 official languages within South Africa, and you don't speak these guys' language. Your car's beginning to catch fire, and there's an elephant down the road as well. What are you going to do? This is not that unusual of a situation. I've been in situations like this a few times. The only thing that's going to get you through is an assumption of a good outcome. So you are not writing a negative script before it begins, which means learning the art of diplomacy and a cool demeanor and keeping your cool. But the other thing is learning that intellect is not necessarily going to get you out of this. What's going to get you out of this is a deep reading of the situation emotionally, and that you will be able to modify your behavior from moment to moment to extricate yourself from something that might be sticky, or maybe even better, these guys will end up totally your friends, fix your car, chase away the elephant, and send you on your way with a beer in your hand. And it's as likely to go that way as it is to go negatively, but only if you listen to your intuition. The other thing which we did an awful lot of growing up was hunting. And when you hunt, you must try to become the animal that you're hunting. If you don't do that, you will not succeed. And it's not an intellectual process. There's a certain amount of logic that comes into it, but then that goes out of the window very, very quickly, and it becomes sort of shamanic. It's actually the same with gathering, though. It's the same with the relationship with plants. Just when you talk about whether someone has a green thumb or not, for example, let alone whether they are very good at, as a herbalist or gathering medicinal plants, whatever, which we all did growing up, you see. You have to cultivate a way of listening to what people call intuition, because logic in many of these situations is only going to get you so far. But if you are in the UK or you are here in the USA, that intuitive thing is not encouraged in children in the way that it is in South Africa, say, because it might really keep you alive down there. Here we have this idea that no, only intellect will do that. And we forget that intellect is just only one of many tools that we've got. And by the way, it's a pretty faulty tool. I am frequently wrong. I wish I wasn't, but I am. I'm frequently wrong. My brain is a faulty tool. I'm often talking out of my arse. I am. I'm sorry, but it's true. So,
Rupert, stop. Just a moment. For those of you who have not read the book, this is a lot of talking. What Rupert has done in this book is brought these experiences that we're intellectually talking about in such a flavorful, clear way, like when the Bushmen were teaching you to track on your first trip as an activist there. but it's the way you tell it. You are such a master storyteller in, besides understanding all of this science behind it. So when somebody reads your book, they're going to get it at a heart, mind, intuitive level that they cannot imagine until they have read your book.
You're very kind. My job as the writer is to place the reader in that situation. My job is for you to be there, and the only way you can do that is to inhabit my nervous system. And the only way I can do that is by recording and remembering very clearly what my nervous system went through in the course of those adventures. So yes, what happened, for those of you who haven't read it, so during the Horseboy, here's what happened. First we went to Mongolia, which appears to be a very stupid thing to do, and which certainly my wife thought was a very stupid thing to do. But Rupert logic was, well, my son had this radical and positive reaction to the horse, and also I was an activist for Bushman hunter-gatherer groups at the time, and I had to bring, the same year that Rome was diagnosed and met Betsy, I had to bring a delegation of Bushmen to the United Nations and the US State Department, and some of the guys on that delegation were trained healers, shamans in their own culture. I had seen a lot of this even growing up, so for me this wasn't like some big leap of culture for me. They offered to do some work on my son. I said, sure, have at it, because it's really just prayer. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is nothing. You can't harm him for it. So knock yourself out. And what happened was a very noticeable and radical lessening of his more obsessive symptoms during the time he was with them. So I thought, okay, radical and positive reaction to the horse, radical and positive reaction to this type of healing. Is there a place that combines these two things? That's Rupert logic, right? Not America, okay. Not Africa, that's not a horse culture. Okay, well then where does the horse come from? Equus caballus, as we know it, comes from Mongolia. Okay, the word shaman, South Siberian word from that area. He who knows. Okay, gut feeling again. Got to go. Present the idea to my wife. She says, Rupert, that's a terrible idea. Just going to the supermarket is so stressful. And my point, again, back to Rupert logic, is yes, because going to the supermarket is so stressful, frankly, we might as well go to Mongolia, because we're basically going to Mongolia every day in our own hometown. So off we went, and this is the story told in The Horseboy in the first part of the long ride home. We went out with a kid that was autistic, and we came back with a kid that was autistic. However, the three key dysfunctions that he had, his incontinence, his tantruming, and his inability to make friends, his isolation, these three things he left behind him in Mongolia. And he came back a very functional young autistic kid. However, the last shaman that we saw of the reindeer people, the people who actually live on reindeer, they ride reindeer, not horses. It's extraordinary up in South Siberia, on the border with Russia there. Ancient culture, very beautiful culture, lovely people. The shaman there, Ghost, said, okay, Ru, these things will change now, but for the healing to last, for the healing to stick, you have to do 3 more journeys and over the next 3 years, and you don't have to he's laughed. He said, you don't have to come here, because I realized that coming into Mongolian Siberia is quite tricky for you. But we chatted, and he said, I know you have contacts in Africa and so on. He said you should look in your own country, in Native America and so on. There's a lot there. Just make sure you do this every year for the next 3 years. So I did. So the following year, we were out in Namibia in Southwest Africa with the Bushman healers that I know personally down there. We worked for 3 days down there. And at the end of those 3 days of ceremony that we did, what came almost immediately was this explosion of mathematics, this mathematical dialogue that had just not been there. We'd done basic numeracy and that sort of thing, but there'd been no picking up and playing with the whole idea of numbers and what they can do. And this happened really suddenly. He was 6, almost 7 at this point. And then the following year, we were out in Australia because work took me there, and I found a really, really good Kuku Yalanji Aboriginal shaman up in the tropical rainforests of the north. And at the end of the 3 days of ceremony there, and by the way, I saw something during that ceremony which is completely mind-blowing, which I'll go into. Normally, a shamanic ceremony, it's a wonderful and beautiful thing, and you have this emotional reaction to it, but you don't necessarily see stuff that challenges your sanity, except on this one, which I saw stuff that blew my brain. and my wife's. And then what came after that was what psychologists call theory of mind. Theory of mind and false belief is what kids normally develop at about 3.5, and most parents don't even notice it, but it's a very important milestone. Kids on the autism spectrum typically don't get to it, or if they get to it very late. And it's where you know that other people think different thoughts to you, and therefore that you need to modify your behavior to this. And the classic way that kids first show this is by pranking, by playing little practical jokes on each other, because a practical joke only works if you know that the other person doesn't know what's going to happen. Otherwise it's not funny, right? If you put, you know, a bucket of water above the door and someone walks underneath it, there's the sort of slapstick effect, but it's only really funny if you get the element of surprise. And to have the element of surprise, you need to understand that that person doesn't know that it's actually quite complex. So he pranked me the day after that last ceremony for the first time. And Kristen, my wife, was with us, who's a professor of developmental psychology. And what he did was, we had stopped at a fast food place and he got some fries. And he, from the back seat of the car as we were driving down the coast road in Queensland, he said, "Dad, do you want a French fry?" And he never, ever offered or shared his food. I was like, that's weird. So I said, "Sure, that's great." And I reached back and looked at it, and he had put this really lifelike toy squid in there. And it really did look like there was a squid coming out of the thing at me. And I went, "Ah!" And he laughed and laughed, and I laughed. And then Kristen went, "Oh my God, theory of mind. He's just achieved theory of mind. This is extraordinary." And then the final year, we were actually on the Navajo reservation here in America. And we identified a really, really good Navajo healer. There's many good Navajo healers, by the way, but he's a particularly good guy. And it was actually another autism parent, an autism mum from Portland, who'd read the book, who organized it for her son, and we all went together. And 3 days of prayer. And at the end of those 3 days of prayer and sweating, what I had really been wanting by now was real conversation. That my son was fully verbal by this point, but it was still quite scripted, the conversation, and sort of sing-song, and not just an easy back and forth exchange of ideas that you would love to take for granted with your kids. And on the last day, we're driving out. We've been up since dawn doing these dawn ceremonies, and we're driving out of the Navajo reservation into New Mexico towards Albuquerque on Interstate 40. And as you drive out of the Navajo reservation, there is a sacred mountain that marks the eastern barrier called Mount Taylor, and it's like Kilimanjaro. It's a beautiful snowcap that sits above the haze of the desert, so it's ethereal and beautiful and wonderful, except because it's America, right underneath it there's a McDonald's and a truck stop and a casino, right? So that's the only food for miles around. So we stop, and what I don't want to do is get Rowan one of those horrible red dye fruity flavored drinks, and he had a code word for these drinks. He loved them, of course, fruity flavored. I want a fruity flavored. And of course I didn't want to give him one, and we start getting into it. He has a tantrum in the McDonald's. Everyone's looking at me, the hippie parent, again, you know, at 7 in the morning, ruining the peace, blah blah blah, with this kid that he can't control. He gets grumpy, I get grumpy, and we're driving off from there, and of course my inner 3-year-old comes out. I'm like, fine, you be grumpy then, you know, spoil the whole day. And from the back seat comes this voice. He says, "Dad, I'm not being grumpy. I'm just telling you what drink I want."
Oh, wow.
And I just had to pull over onto the shoulder. I'm like, and who are you? Have we met? Have we been introduced?
And Rupert, I love this in your book, through so many of the journeys, how you had times like this. And I think one of the things that makes you so unique with what you bring to the world of autism spectrum is the fact that during those developmental years, you had Kristen with her professor concept, and you with your intuition, and then Rowan. I mean, this and it's just a remarkable weaving that has happened.
Yeah, we were very lucky that I think all of us were bringing certain skill sets to the table, and that one of the great things about Kristen, my ex, but we're still so close, is she's a hard scientist, but she's also a great listener, and she's been a practicing Buddhist for 5,000 years, and her work is all at the nexus of where Buddhism and mainstream psychology meet. What she's known for is work with self-compassion and positive mental health, i.e. measuring people's capacity to be compassionate towards themselves against their relative positive or negative mental health, and realizing that if you teach people these techniques, the positive mental health outcomes are really quite tangible. And so even though she's a science mind, she can still deal with the irrational quite well.
I have a question to ask you. With all of this that you put together, can you give a little bit of an overview of what kind of program have you put together for parents whose children have autism, and they don't have the ability to go and do the work on horses, because you mentioned that there's so many other ways?
There are. Okay, so the first thing to do, if you know someone with a kid on the spectrum, you have a family member on the spectrum, maybe it's a kid, a grandchild, a nephew, a niece, whatever, go to this website that we created. It's called kidsmustmove.com. Go to Kids Must Move. That is actually part of a larger website called Horseboy World, but it will take you to specifically to the kinetic learning part. And there's a little online course there that you can download and take that course, and that will teach you the 6 things that you need to know about kinetic learning. We outlined them, what I was talking about with the effects of the brain and so forth, and how you feed the information in. And then from there, if you find that that works for you and your child, also you need an understanding of the sensory stuff, which we give you there. Then we have about 150 modules on the Horseboy World website that you can download that specifically say, how do you teach math at this grade level? How do you teach science at this grade level kinetically? You know, how do you teach basic communication? How do you teach statistics? How do you teach geometry? Blah, blah, blah. And that's all there on that website.
And so when you're saying kinetically, you're meaning with
movement. Some people use the word kinetic, some people use the word kinesthetic, but it's all the kinesiology. It's the same thing, i.e. How movement affects the brain. And one of the nice things about today's ed science environment is that there is no controversy anymore among the researchers that movement and the correct environment make learning possible, in a way that a bad environment and no movement make learning almost impossible. This is now so known. So there's no conflict there. Now, in school districts with teachers who are doing the sit down and shut up because I tell you to blah, 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 so over teaching. Well, yes, but these people are not neuroscientists, and these teachers do not follow the latest neuroscience. However, there are actually quite a lot of teachers that do. But you as a parent do not have to. This is the really important thing that I can't urge you strongly enough not to do. Do not rely upon outside resources to help you. Do not sit there lamenting and bemoaning the fact that government, state, school, whoever is not stepping up and giving you the resources, even if they should, even if there's legislation in place that says that they should. Don't bother taking your school district to court, which a lot of people do, in order to get services that they do not want to give you anyway. Anything that's reluctantly given is not worth having. It'll be half-assed, it'll be shit. Learn how to be your own resource. Do that, you're going to be golden. And relax, chill. When we are dealing with a neurotypical child, we have no trouble thinking in 20 to 25 year span of an education. Obviously, when it comes to special needs, we feel this sense of urgency and we want to be responsible. And so from a very good place, we want to get in there and get results now and get it done. But actually, that's not how brains operate. And that's not how learning happens. You can see quite radical changes quite quickly because the brain is very plastic. So yes, if you change your environment sensory and you do these 6 kinetic learning techniques, you're going to see a lot of improvement very fast. But the time it takes for the child to say, go on and get a postgraduate degree or something like that, will be exactly the same amount of time it takes for a neurotypical child. So you can relax. There is no problem to fix here. There's no problem in autism. Autism is a perfectly viable way to go through life. Now, there are some skills we need to teach them. If you're pooing your pants, you can't make friends and you can't speak. Okay, fine, we need to address these things. But we absolutely can, by understanding the brain, understanding the vagal nerve and vagal tone, things like this help us get there. But in a weird way, you could say that's the easy part. The more difficult part is really recognizing what are the gifts of autism, and not just what are the deficits. It's too easy to identify the deficits. What are the gifts? And this is where allowing yourself to be mentored by people on the spectrum is your best bet. Or it's the same, let's say you had a child who's suffering from schizophrenia. Go and learn from schizophrenics. This is an highly articulate population. Let them mentor you. Don't have a knee-jerk reaction and immediately go to medications and all that. There's so many things that we can do before this. Okay, these are very viable ways of going through the world. Okay, so if you spend, like I have, an inordinate amount of time living with hunting and gathering groups, one of the things that you will notice over time is that the people who are the healers, the shamans in these groups, almost always display neuropsychiatric symptoms. Could be adult autism, schizophrenia, bipolar, epilepsy, any number of things. And often they exhibit these neuropsychiatric symptoms to the degree that they would certainly be medicated if they were in our culture, but they would often be institutionalized. Yet they're not. There, it's regarded as a job qualification, not a disqualification from society. And one has to remember that these people do not know what the word New Age means. They've never heard it. They are not woo-woo. They don't know what woo-woo is. They are much more practical people than us. They are all about survival. They live in environments that are incredibly harsh. So they don't waste their time farting about with whimsical notions just because it pleases them. If something works, they do it, and if it doesn't, they don't. So they know that the irrational is as important as the rational. They know that the gut and intuition is as important as the intellect. They know that what you can explain versus what you can't explain is equally important. And these people who somehow sit at the nexus of this have a very good, have a central place in their healing. When the book first came out and the movie of The Horse Boy, I had a private screening of the movie for family members, and my uncle he retired, but he was the head of pathology at University College Hospital in London, which is the equivalent of Johns Hopkins. And he was a very, very hard scientist, an oncologist, pathologist who came up with a very effective form of treatment for a certain form of stomach cancer and so on. So he's a very hard scientist and effective scientist, not a particularly nice man. And certainly not shy to tell you were full of shit if he thought you were. So when the movie came out and all the shaman stuff, etc., horse stuff, I walked up to him at the end and I opened an imaginary umbrella and I said, take a shit. I know you're going to do it. Do your worst. I've been preparing for this all day. Give me your best. And he said, actually, Rupert, I'm not going to take a shit today. And I said, that's unlike you, Uncle Peter. Why? And he said, well, two things. One is you're presenting a piece of work that is saying that autism maybe isn't the end of the world. In fact, could be kind of a good thing. That's quite interesting. But the second thing is you've hit on the irrational side of medicine. And I said, well, what is that? What do you mean? He said, it's the placebo effect. He said, people misunderstand the placebo effect. He said, people in the West dismiss something because it's the placebo effect, which means they fundamentally misunderstand what the placebo effect is, because no drug can get on the market unless it's gone through a trial where a control group of a certain number of people gets a placebo. And the drug has to make more people better than the placebo does. In many trials, more people get better on the placebo. And they don't just think they get better and then go and die later. They actually get better. And nobody knows why. So a drug can only make it to market if it can make more people better than the placebo. So we know that we can, so he said, if we know that we can activate the immune system through suggestion and irrational response, and a doctor with a good bedside manner, his patients get better, and a doctor with a bad bedside manner who got a first at Harvard kills his patients. This is known. Is it so far that this could also have an effect on the brain? And he said, no, that seems to me pretty plausible, as what I know as a scientist. So for that reason, I'm not taking a shit today, but maybe tomorrow. So it comes back once again to this idea that if you only value one aspect of life, if you only value intellect, reason, logic, prefrontal cortex stuff, which is certainly there to be valued, you're going to miss all the other things that the brain does. And that we know that the subconscious and the unconscious as well are doing all these things all the time. We do know this intellectually, but because we can't quite put our finger on it, we tend to dismiss it, and we only place value on what seems to be empirical. However, the irrational is empirical, because these people on the placebo effect who are getting better on these drug trials, this is well recorded and known. It's just that we can't quite measure it.
We have only 3 minutes left.
Okay.
And I want you to repeat for everyone. They first go to www.horseboyworld. Yes.
Okay, well, if you've got a problem with autism or ADD or ADHD or something like that in your family, go first to kidsmustmove.com, kidsmustmove.com, and that will take you to the part of our website of Horseboy World, which deals specifically with the non-horse kinetic learning side of what we do. The wider aspect of what we do with horses and everything like that is in the rest of the website, Horseboy World. Yes. And if you haven't bought the book, we'd love you to buy it, because all the proceeds go to the foundation, which gives free services to autism families. So the $20 that you spend on a book actually does help a family get services.
And the fact that all the work that you do at Horseboy World, it's for the families without cost.
It's at our center in Texas. If you're a family within 150 miles, all our services are free. We now have centers in about 13 countries. Some of them offer free services, some of them don't. You know, they all operate in their own independent way. But we ourselves at the original place, yes, if you're a local family, and by local we mean 150 miles, it's a pretty big catchment area. It's free, costs you zilch, and it will always be that way.
And I would like, because I know we have some people listening in, they were going to, if they couldn't catch it now, they're going to really listen to you later, families who are living with children in the autism spectrum. And what you said and what you demonstrate in your books about following the passion, following Rowan, allowing him to lead you. There are 2 other books that I would like for inspiration to recommend, and that is The Spark.
I agree.
Which, I mean, it's just an amazing book.
Christine Barnett, she's a genius.
Yeah, and the other one that Eliana suggested that I just finished is Iris. It's another. Iris
Grace, yes. And we work very closely with the 2 authors of those 2 books.
Yeah, and it gives hope. It gives hope, and when I think with all of you, what it takes to overcome the families and this idea that you should follow the government programs, the so-called experts, that didn't work for any of you.
Yeah.
It's really important that we get this. We wanted to share your story, and get it out to our people.
Totally. It's only people that are usually parents who have skin in the game who do it from the ground up. You know this, Elinor, yourself. We're the only ones who would stumble into these things, because we're living it 24/7.
And there's all variations on the theme.
Yes, there are. Yes, there are.
On the theme. I would love to hear, because I would like to have a few minutes to bring in people if they want to ask questions. But I would love to hear from you some of the gifts. Okay, good. The 3 main gifts, there's 3 main ones that spring to mind immediately. The very obvious one is the steel trap, almost photographic memory. This is an extraordinary thing that most kids on the spectrum have. The second one is the intellect appears to be operating at an above average way. And that isn't necessarily because the child's IQ is higher. It's usually because once they can access it, they are less susceptible to social distractions, so that they get on with the job and they apply their intellect usually in a more focused way than me, because, oh, look, she's got nice tits, over there or something like that. You know what I mean? I'm instantly distractible. These guys are not. So they're able to put their intellect to use once they can access it through kinetic learning techniques, so often better than, say, someone like me can. Then the third, and I think this is the most important of all the gifts, it's what Buddhists would call the quiet ego. And I don't actually include people on the Asperger's
part of the spectrum in this. Often the Asperger's can often actually go a bit with asshole, that there's often a giant ego there. But with people that are on more the classic end of the autism spectrum, it's not that the ego isn't there, but it's really in the background. For somebody like me, who obviously has an ego like an 800-pound gorilla, and I'm always battling with it. And I'm born with this. It's neither bad nor good. And most of us neurotypicals are, if we are completely honest. The problem with this ego that we have is that when it's working well, it's like a horse that pulls the cart. It's a good thing. But when it's not working so well, it causes us immense amount of psychological suffering and distress, because you always have this inner critic in your head saying, he's taller than me, he makes more money than me, he's a better writer than me, she's got better tits than me, and she's a PhD. This is going on all the time, and there's plenty of neurotypical people every year jumping off bridges, disappearing down bottles, and beating up their wives and kids because of this, being driven insane by this terrible inner voice, particularly in a competitive society. One of the interesting things about people on the autism spectrum, because they also lack mirror neurons, for a lot of them, is they don't reflect your ego back to you. So when you are with them as a neurotypical, you actually get a bit of a break from that inner voice. So it begs the question, who's the therapist? Should you be paying these guys $100 an hour to hang out with them so you get a break from that psychological pain and distress? The answer is probably yes, which brings us back to, in those indigenous settings where you have the shaman or the healer, who is somebody with this very quiet ego, who, when you bring him your psychological troubles, doesn't reflect them back at you, doesn't rub your nose in your shit, doesn't shame you, doesn't judge you, because there's not that sort of ego at work there. That means that their ability to heal is incredibly effective. And so these are the three gifts that I think are the most obvious and important to me.
Wow, that's huge. And that's interesting that you make a differentiation between the more typical autism versus Asperger's, because again of the variation.
There's a huge spectrum that we're talking about here, yeah.
Right.
And remember, it's not just a spectrum, it's also a continuum. So where somebody is on the spectrum now is not necessarily where they're going to be in a year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, that you see enormous amounts of growth and improvement, provided we're getting in there with the right things.
Yeah, what a blessing. What a blessing. I want to ask, hold on, I'm going to put everybody on the screen, and I can unmute one person at a time. If anybody would like to ask a question or say something. Sally, do you want to say something? Wait, I have to find where you are here. Hold on 1 sec. 1 second. Unmute. Sally always has something wonderful to say.
Well, now I want to ask for some expansion about Asperger's, because most of the people I work with have been diagnosed with Asperger's. So I'd like you to just comment a little more fully about that, if you could.
Okay, well, I love the word Asperger's because I always think of a burger made of ass. I was like biting into this big ass burger. But of course, it's actually with a P. Asperger's is, generally sort of mad professor syndrome, people who are operating intellectually, usually at a very high IQ, but they have usually 2 or 3 areas of real obsessional focus. They tend not to be generalists. And within those areas of focus, they become so expert and so adept that they often are highly sought out within certain industries, the tech industry being the obvious one. However, because of the lack of Purkinje cells going on and the brain not developing at a global rate, often where they lack is empathy and social skills. So the myth that all autists lack empathy is really actually just a feature, a little bit of the Asperger's people, not so much autists in general. Actually, most of the most empathetic people I know are autists, but they don't happen to be on the Asperger's end. They tend to often have to learn it a little bit. And they do and can over time, because it often pains them, the negative social interactions they get into. But some of them become absolute narcissists. There is a small population that are total narcissists. And when you're dealing with those guys, what you have to do is just accept that that is who they are and benefit greatly from their areas of expertise, and protect yourself a little bit because they're going to be rough with you. But there's a lot of people on the Asperger's end, particularly women on the Asperger's end, because people think of this as something very male, because typically in our society, the people that have been the professors that have been the scientists, it's been a very male-dominated thing, but that's changing now. And a lot of women are diagnosed with Asperger's too. And I think there's a big effort amongst that population, because they want to have children, they want to have families, and so on, to really do the work personally that they need to do to cultivate the more empathetic side, etc. And there's some really interesting good blogs out there actually by female Asperger's people about dealing with this, which are worth reading. Just type, Asperger's empathy women sort of into Google and stuff will come up. So that's sort of my 2 cents over Asperger's. If you have a kid that has gets a diagnosis of Asperger's, you're probably onto a bit of a winning shot for your retirement if they go into the tech industry. But if they end up in an industry which requires an awful lot of empathetic human interaction, they may not thrive so well. But fortunately, because a lot of their emphases can be the scientific, that they can often find a very good niche there. Ironically, you know where else you find them? In the horse world. And you get a lot of these obsessional narcissists within the horse world,
right,
who are very good, but they can't really transmit what they know, because they're harsh and they're judgmental and immensely distressing to try and learn from, because they're arseholes in that moment. They are behaving pretty badly, even if the information that they have to transmit is worth having. So as a neurotypical, you have to learn to sort of navigate your way around these people a little bit. But knowing it makes it easy. So then if you know that and you go, oh, I see this person's Asperger's, then it becomes much easier for you not to take it personally if they sort of are rolling their eyes at you because you don't know quantum physics, and like, well, okay, I don't know quantum physics.
Do you
That's
want to
fine.
say something on that?
Elinor, what I want to say on this actually is because I feel that this is such important work that you are taking around the world, I'd like to give people a way, Rupert, of supporting the Horseboy program. That you can go to your website, you can become a member, if you can tell them.
You can, absolutely, yes. Thank you for bringing this up. So yes, we fundraise. We have a foundation. You can either go to horseboyfoundation.org, which is its own website, and donate for the work that we do. Or on Horseboy World, you can sign up as a member, and you can have, it's a paying website. You can either do it for $10 a month, or you can do a slightly more expensive one for $250 for the year, where you get all our modules, all of our 150 and rising all the time educational modules. You have access to us personally. We do at least 2 live webinars a month, going through different aspects of kinetic learning and so forth. And what that also does is it connects you to a wider community. However, you don't actually have to pay anything to be a member of our website. You can totally join for free and still actually get quite a lot of good information that we just put on there. But if you fancy knowing more and you want to get into it more, then that $10 a month or whatever actually goes an enormous way to financing what we do around the world.
And another thing you can do is what I've done is on Amazon, you can go to smile.amazon.com and everything I buy gives 5% to Horseboy World.
Thank you.
That's something that I just absolutely believe that what you're doing is such a gift to the world. I really want to encourage, if our people who hear this now and later haven't done it, consider doing that.
Please, thank you. I'm very honored that you would make that that plea. So thank you.
Oh, I'm going to go do that as soon as we get off.
Right.
No brainer.
Horseboy Foundation. Horseboy Foundation is the charity.
And the other thing that we can do, Elinor, we can put this up now and have everybody share it.
Right.
What if you got, actually, Ileana could send us that we put up on our Facebooks and then start sharing it around.
That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. Yeah. Social media, as we know, it's the new alchemy. And it really does work. If you guys would share, that would be fantastic. I mean, remember too that there's a lot of people out there in the same position that I was in 10 years ago, just floundering around with a whole bunch of misinformation. And the only people who give you any meaningful information in these crisis situations are veterans who've already lived through it. And so there is a real need for us within the community to give a hand up to the next lot coming, so that they don't have to bugger about expensively and be ripped off and all these things that we all had to do on the way to coming to solutions, that they can go much more directly to what they need.
And next year, when we'll get a date with Elinor, as we did last year, we took 20 people from 4 countries who are bringing T-Touch to your parents that we could share with the parents.
Absolutely.
We'll do that again next year.
And T-Touch, something like T-Touch is very much part of this sensory kinetic component. You know, it's hitting a lot of these things that I've been talking about. And this is something that a parent can learn to do in their living room. It's of immense value. You know, you can do it right now during a car ride.
Right.
You don't need expensive equipment. You don't need infrastructure. You don't need nothing. You don't even need play equipment. You can just be doing this, and you can also do it while the kids are on the play equipment.
Exactly.
So I'm a great believer.
And you know, this is so crucial because the statistics, for whatever reasons, are climbing higher and higher
all the time
and higher. And every year, every 2 years, it's jumping exponentially.
Absolutely.
And so this is something that we have to make that is reasonable and affordable and educational. And this is what you offer in that support. And the parents that, Linda, remember the parents we got to talk to at your Horseboy Clinic were their life was changed. Their life, you gave them back the meaning to their life in the way of helping their children and their child and their neurotypical child, right? Their neurologically healthy child coming, and then creates the bond between 2 children in the family versus one child saying, what's wrong with that? You know, because you're always making me take care of him. And it's like in the old days, because it was that way in the old days where the older child or the one that had to do the taking care of felt resentful. And now it's not. You're seeing more of that love, that understanding, that compassion. You're taking in the whole family. Yeah,
that's very important to what we do. We always serve the family. And there's a couple of very practical reasons for that. So one is, yes, in most special needs families, all the time, money, attention, etc., is going to the special needs kid. It causes resentment and so forth. So what we do is we say, no, bring the whole family, as the siblings, everything. We'll find out what they're all into. This one likes riding, fine, they get riding lessons. This one likes soccer and martial arts, no problem. We'll bring in really good soccer and martial arts people. And what that does is it changes the family dynamic. So suddenly the neurotypical sibling who up until now, their dreams have been blocked by their brother or sister's special needs or autism, now the doors to the open because of the autism. It changes the relationship within the family, and so massively takes pressure off the parent, etc. But the other reason is really practical for us as practitioners. I don't know your kid. So if you bring your kid to me, it doesn't matter if I've worked with 5,000 autistic kids, they're all different. So I need a guide, I need a mentor, and I need a consultant. And that's partly the parent, but really it's the sibling. The brother and the sister always know that they'll tell me in like 5 seconds, do this, don't do that, he loves this, he hates that, make sure you talk about, oh, when he makes that funny noise, it means this. Stuff that would take me, 5 years to work out. If I was lucky, I can learn in 30 seconds by having that consultant at my shoulder. So I need to serve that consultant too.
That's brilliant.
Last year, Elinor, maybe you remember this, one of the things when we were in Elgin, at your place, Rupert, and one of the typical scenes that I remember was one of your therapists riding with one of the brothers or sisters, and they were really having fun on the horse, and the child with in the autism spectrum was in the arena, in the sand, playing with the dog, playing with a couple of other volunteers. I mean, it was such a beautiful scene, and actually we had some of our people off doing T-Touch on a parent who was just sitting there watching. Enjoying having a chance to have a break while you all took care during the play date. I love that you call them play dates. not therapy sessions.
No, the word therapy never crosses our lips.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And some running around in the wheelbarrow, some with the goats, some with the guinea pigs. I mean, it just makes my heart sing. And walking through the woods with them, we had an amazing time. Remember walking through the woods?
Yes. Oof, that was so amazing.
Yeah, what we want is not just for the kid to learn and get a therapeutic effect, but we want them when they come down our driveway or the driveway of any horseboy place or movement method place, is to think, yes, this is the place I want to be, not, oh shit, here I have to be at this other therapy place because I'm really shit as a kid and I need therapy because something's wrong with me, which is a horrible message to give to a kid. And it's a useless message to give to a kid. And there's going to be these adults who expect something from me that I don't really know what to do and I'm always getting it wrong. No. This is the place that really knows that I love Grand Theft Auto and is just all about Grand Theft Auto when I walk through that door. We're speaking, that's what's going to get you success.
And what I want you also to talk about at your place and some of these other places around the world that are developing are the brilliant young people who come as interns.
Yeah, it's true.
Amazing, from around the world.
We do. We have a really good working student program. And so we always have a team. We have a core team that's permanent at our place, but we also have a constant flow of really amazing people. They're usually female, they're usually between undergrad and grad, usually somewhere in the field of ed psych, ed, special ed, neuroscience, somewhere. They often have a love of horses, but if they don't, they often have a love of movement. And these are top brains that come to us from top universities, and what they bring is university affiliations with them. So through them, we've ended up, there have been numerous studies done on horseboy method and movement method at various universities around the world, and now some are looking at doing college accredited courses in what we do, etc.
So tell us a little bit about where now the new centers are, because just since we were there, I know you've had a big change.
Okay, well, we've got a bunch in the USA, and Colorado is a place we're very well represented. We have a number of good ones in Colorado, but we have about 10 or 12 really good places dotted through the USA, coast, Midwest, everywhere. Then in Europe, we have a cluster of good ones in the Netherlands, in the UK, in Ireland, in France, in Germany now suddenly a bunch have started, and then there's sort of outliers in places like, we have a really, really good one in Portugal, for example, that is rapidly about to become better than us, I think. And one of our places in the UK is about to become better than us as well, I think.
Do you have places in Italy? Because we've got two wonderful.
We do not yet, but we have. One of our best researchers and core team members came to us from the University of Bologna. She's someone called Sonia Sofia Riccibiti, which means Riccibiti, it actually means porcupine in Italian. We happen to have pet porcupines, so it's a rather odd little horseboy in joke. But no, we want to set up workshops in Italy. We were actually doing workshops in Italy for a while, and we had a good place that was beginning to offer it down in Calabria, but they collapsed.
I have two good places after this I'm going to get to you.
Wonderful.
Great. Everybody, because we're really going over, and I want to keep people to be able to watch all of this, I'm going to say that to send them to horseboyworld.com, and you can also look at horseboyfoundation.org, and like Linda said, she goes to smile.amazon.com, and 5% of everything you buy will go over to Horseboy, and this is all helping fund families from everywhere to come and help their children for what Rupert and your girlfriend Ileana has put together on your with the whole program. And I just really want to give you a huge gracious thank you. I wish I could be there this November. I'm looking forward to next time and seeing what we can do. And hold on, I have one person asking a question. Okay, so it's different. So I just want to say, Rupert, thank you. We're going to You're a blessing.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I'm really honored that you had me on. I deeply appreciate it.
Thank you for making the time to come on and share your stories and your books and your organization. And in detail, your work is so needed as you're growing around the world to help children.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for being part of that and for helping us out.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And for
Okay.
everybody, we're going to send this recording to you, and then we will send you the immediately the title for the next book and when the next book club will be. Okay?
Okay.
Tell them now.
What, Linda?
You can tell them now what the next title
Oh,
is.
absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So, Linda, do you want to tell them the next book?
I do. And it's just been so wonderful having Rupert on as our speaker and having Dr. Alan Schoen with the Compassionate Equestrian. And so in continuing in this theme, in this way, next time we are going to have Shannon Weil with the book that she wrote about my school, Strike Along Trot. And she wrote this book about her 1 year experience at my residential school in Badger, California. And I'm hoping, of course, that we're going to have other from our students there. And Elinor, I want you to talk about your experience. Is that she was there in 1968 and you were there for 7 weeks, actually 3 times 7 weeks in the 70s, early 70s, right?
Right.
So that's going to be, and the date is going to be September
22nd on Thursday. It will be at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Again, it's Strike Along Trot by Shannon Weil, and it will be on Thursday, September 22nd at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and we'll send it out right away and let you know.
And it's her experience of my school, and it's Strike Along Trot, the legendary horsewoman Linda Tellington-Jones, and she tells it in such a beautiful way. Her experience as an 18-year-old with all the details of that school. So I know, Sally, I see you in the background here, all your experience over the years from some of this work that we've all been blessed to share and be friends over so many years.
And bringing them in. Thank you all so much, Linda. Without you, how could we even have this? And Rupert, for you coming and sharing your stories. Oh, Linda, my favorite thing to end. Every time we do our book club, Rupert, come join our oxytocin hugs.
I'd love to.
So we put one hand over the other on our heart chakra. And we imagine the face of a clock, because imagining activates the right side of the brain. And the face of the clock with the numbers 6 toward the ground, put the numbers on, activates the left side, the logic. So we get both feeling and heart and logic and reason. So you just very lightly connect at the imaginary 6 o'clock and gently move the skin in whichever direction you prefer, 1 time and a quarter, and a nice deep breath. And then release again and place your hands again at this imaginary 6 o'clock and check to see which is your preferred direction, left or right, 1 time and a quarter. Nice deep breath. And smile, because the smile, once again, also activates that wonderful feel-good hormone. And now let's all together send out love to all the people around the planet who are dealing in whatever way with this autism spectrum, whether it's the parents, the children, to all those of all ages. And send love and blessings and the knowing that just us recognizing their specialness will make a difference in the whole quantum field in finding each person to find their own special way. I love you guys.
Love you.
Likewise. See you soon.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.